Hey, Math Moment Makers, it's Kyle here, and I am ready to talk with you a little bit today about a concept that many of us have taught in some way, shape, or form. But I'll be honest, I haven't been, in the past anyway, I wasn't super inspired to teach this concept. We tend to sort of rush to the algorithm, which is something that both John and I, through the Make Math Moments framework, the three-part framework, that we try to avoid. But it is one of those concepts where we tend to just sort of give formulas and have students do a bunch of calculations. So what is it that we're talking about? Well, stick around and you'll see right after our intro video. Here we go. All right, so what is that concept? Some people might be wondering and thinking, like, there's a concept that Kyle doesn't actually enjoy. Well, actually, I do enjoy teaching this concept now, but in the past, I tend to rush to formulas and algorithms. And the reality was I just didn't really know what else to do. And this topic involves volume. Now, some of you might be thinking, you could do some pretty interesting things with volume, which is true. And I would argue that a lot of people do interesting things when introducing formulas for finding the volume of, say, a rectangular prism. Maybe people, they take like a Kleenex box and start putting Unifix cubes into the Kleenex box and then have students, sort of make this connection that the area of the base times the height is going to get you your volume. Well, that's something that I would do as well. But what would happen when we started to venture off from rectangular prisms and we started to look at things like, say, cylinders? Things get a little bit more procedural. It seems that we would rush to formulas. Now, why is that? Well, first off, I'll be honest and say when I was teaching area of a circle, I would rush to a formula because for many years, I actually didn't understand why the formula worked. I understood why it worked algebraically. I could make some sense through algebraic reasoning, but that didn't help my students, especially my students who were struggling a little bit. So we had to break things down and we had to start looking at, like, what does it mean to find the area of a circle? Now, if you've been on our website and in particular in our Make Math Moments problem-based lessons area, you probably noticed that we had quite a few problem-based lessons. One in particular that I'll highlight, which helped me to get on this journey, on this path of avoiding the rush to the algorithm, really started with this going in circles unit, where we first emerged where this idea of the circumference and how to calculate the circumference and really exploring and investigating the relationship of the diameter to the circumference, which is pi. We do a lot of work here. And then we also use that in order to extend to the area of a circle. We don't think of area of a circle as just pi r squared, which is how I taught it for many years. We emerged the idea that actually if you were to take that circle and we were to decompose that circle and try to make it look like a simple shape that we know how to calculate, like a rectangle or a parallelogram, then we can actually use this reasoning and use simply length times width in order to find our area. Well, after doing that work, we then started thinking about, how do we actually apply this conceptual idea, this conceptual understanding to volume of a cylinder and extending that to volume of a cone and finally volume of a sphere. These ones, and in particular, when I was teaching the volume of a sphere, basically what I would do right away at the start of the lesson was I would give them the formula because I didn't understand how the formula worked. And after doing some digging and doing some learning, realized that actually by building on this conceptual understanding, so let's reiterate here what we had already mentioned. So we calculate the area of a circle by thinking of areas of rectangles, which is something we know. Okay, students have that information. Now, we could take that and we can apply it to our work with volume of a cylinder. So what we did is we started and we created a problem-based unit which uncovers this idea of extending our conceptual understanding of area of a circle and our understanding that the volume of a prism is simply the area of the base times the height. We could then emerge the formula for volume of a cylinder without simply saying to students, it's pi r squared times the height. We actually have them work through and actually estimate and approximate using their conceptual understanding. So let's dive in here. And then I want to share how we've taken this concept and extended it to volume of a cone as well as volume of a sphere. So two concepts that, again, I used to rush through, give students formulas. And then, even on like an assessment or a test or a standardized test, students would just like rely on these formula sheets in order to calculate. Now I want students to understand how they relate, how there's a relationship between the volume of a cylinder, the volume of a cone, and the volume of a sphere. And we do so through this particular unit. So when we dive into day one of Pop Goes the Volume, our first problem-based task, which involves this Spark video right here, is inspired by Dan Meyer's Popcorn Picker video series. So he has a 3-act math task. It's a fantastic prompt. It's very much like this, where Dan is wrapping, taking a piece of paper, and he makes a cylinder, kind of the long way as well as the narrow way, and then the question becomes for students, what do you notice? What do you wonder about these two cylinders? And students will bring up all kinds of different ideas. They'll say things like, well, it was, the same sheet of paper. A lot of students might even come to the conclusion that because you're using one regular loose leaf piece of paper, it doesn't matter how you fold it. It should hold the same amount of popcorn. Like, that feels right. Your fast thinking brain sort of goes there. Some students might want to know how many kernels of corn or popcorn there is. Some students might say, I think this one holds more than that one. Whatever they come up with, we get them noticing and wondering, and then we actually have them sort of take a stand. We say, which cylinder can hold more popcorn, make an estimate or a prediction, and say, which one. And if you're daring enough, like, is it a lot more? Is it a little more? Which one do you think? And you can hold this vote with your students in the classroom. As we roll along, we actually have them build these cylinders themselves in order to investigate. It's really important that students take the time to actually sort of grapple with this idea. And some students, they might build these two cylinders and they might just take things from the classroom. Like, they might have something, a large object that they can sort of fit in one and, kind of spatially decide whether, the tall and narrow cylinder or the short and wide cylinder, whether it's the same volume, if it's similar, if one's a lot more or one's a lot less. We get them actually working through this problem. Having different tools available is really helpful. Like, for example, if you have like Unifix cubes, like, students can like pile those in and come up with like a reasonable estimate anyway. They'll at least get to see. You might bring popcorn to class. They can actually fill it with actual popcorn and use that as their tool. And ultimately from there, we get students to sort of update their estimate or update their prediction based on what they see. And then finally, in our reveal video from this particular day, students not only get to see the popcorn filling these different cylinders, but then they get to actually get a good visual here. And most students can see that the cylinder on the left, it appears like it has more popcorn kernels, but we're actually going to count these out here just so that students have, a very clear understanding of the fact that actually the cylinder on the left actually has significantly more popcorn kernels than the cylinder on the right. And as they count that up, we end up with a significantly more popcorn kernels than the cylinder on the right. So the cylinder on the left, I should say, has significantly more kernels than the cylinder on the right. Now from here, we want to actually consolidate, and you'll see in the guide tab that you can head down and you can actually see different student approaches. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we want students to gain an understanding of what's actually going on here. And we have a visual created where students can sort of see this taking place. We actually use popcorn kernels to model the area of the base and actually show us how many kernels it would take to cover the area of the base. And then we can use this thinking and say, well, if it's 33 popcorn kernels, and let's say they're about a centimeter tall, I can actually, use partial quotients. I can use additive thinking by adding layers of 33 repeatedly, or I can use more of a multiplicative approach and, multiply 33 by 5 and then maybe 33 by another 3 and add those together and then take half of 33 and toss it together. We do the same thing with the other cylinder, and we can get a good sense of what the volume of a cylinder formula really is. So really what we're trying to get students to see is that if we can find the area of that base, so we can cover it with square tiles. In this case, we use popcorn, which is more of a 3D object, which is helpful for volume. So when we find the area of the base in popcorn kernels, we actually almost have the area or the volume of that first layer. And then we can just essentially think of this cylinder as slices of that layer all the way to the top. So really trying to leverage the spatial reasoning and understanding to help us get there. And, this first day, of course, we have some consolidation prompts in order to get students, working with these problems and actually doing some calculating on their own, as well as a printable. But what I really love about this unit, this is just an introduction to getting us thinking about the volume of a cylinder. So again, students should have a clear, a really comfortable understanding, conceptual understanding of the area of a circle. They should also have a comfortable understanding of volume of prisms in general, right? So this shouldn't be a brand new idea to them. But the part that I really love is how in days 2, 3, 4, and 5, how this evolves and starts to bring in cones and spheres. And we start to look at cones and spheres, the volume of a cone and the volume of a sphere in relation to the volume of a cylinder. So let's go ahead and dive into day number 2. And you'll notice actually at the beginning of day number 2, we have a math talk set up for you. And these are visual math talks. So you'll see, we won't go through the whole math talk, but just to give you a sense, we want to get students feeling confident in calculating the volume of a cylinder, especially using a bit of their, we're going to say conceptual understanding. So when we look at this and we give them the top view and the side view of you'll see a very short cylinder, and we've done this intentionally. We basically want them to see that first layer is going to be the same quantity as the area, but in cubic units. So instead of in square units, we're now kind of bumping it up by one unit. So we get a cubic unit for that first layer. And, we give them some time here. We'll ask them to approximate. And the reason we ask them to approximate is so that they can actually work through this problem without a calculator. Now, some of you might be wondering, how would a student do this if I know that the area of a circle is pi r squared? Well, they could use the formula, but actually what we really want students to sort of leverage is what they remember from the area of a circle. And, when we were working with area of a circle with our students, what we like to do is we like to actually get them to think about this circle. And you'll see this in the Going in Circles unit, where we take a circle, we know either the radius or the diameter. In this case, we have a radius of 15 centimeters. That means our diameter is going to be 30 centimeters. Well, we want students to have this understanding that, remember, the relationship between the diameter and the circumference is pi, that ratio of pi. And that means that my circumference should be about 3 and a bit times my diameter. So I want students sort of in their mind thinking, you know what, like circumference is around 90 centimeters. Maybe they want to be more precise, and that's fantastic. If they want to find the extra, 13%, 13% of pi, or 13% of the diameter, I should say, they're totally welcome to do that. But just to keep the numbers nice and clean, this is what we're thinking about here. And we go, okay, so that's 90. Now, how do I find the area? Well, we want students to have, first of all, they might know pi r squared. And if they do, awesome. That's great. Fantastic. Run away with it. But I hope that they still remember that actually, if we were to chop this circle up into all kinds of pieces, like infinitely many pieces, and we took these pieces and we rearranged them by taking pizza slices and kind of placing them, inverting every other pizza slice, you're going to get something that's pretty close to a rectangle or a parallelogram. And what you have is like, this is the crust and this is the radius. So we know that this is 15 centimeters. And I have crust pieces, like here's a piece of crust, there's crust, here's crust, there's crust. So basically my crust is half of my circumference. So I know that my length is about 45 centimeters. And through this thinking, students can land on, and they can use, and another beauty part of doing this process is they can actually use partial products in order to help them calculate this area. Now, it's an approximation, we know. Okay, so we're not gonna, I'm not so concerned about how precise their calculation is. It's more about the understanding and how this works, like how to calculate the area. Again, they could just do pi r squared. Interestingly enough, r is 15 centimeters here. So this is r here. But also it's like pi r squared, if you think about this, they explore this in our circles unit, going in circles. What you realize is it's like basically you have 3 and a bit r squared. So it's like basically what I have is I have like an r squared, I have another r squared, I didn't make this long enough, and another r squared plus this little tiny slice, which is that like 0.14 of a radius. So over here, this is one way we can approach it. Like we can use this formula. Other students might say, you know what, I find it easier to calculate knowing that this is 45 centimeters, as we've said, and this is 15 centimeters, as we've said. And they go, I really like working with tens. So they go, okay, well, like if I went 15 times 10 centimeters, that's 150. And they know, okay, well, that means that 20 centimeters is another 150, or this whole thing is 300. There's 20. Oh, okay, all the way to 40 then. If we do another 20 over here, there's 300, or we can say 600 centimeters squared. Okay, there's 40, and then I need another 5 to add on over here. So here I've got 20, 40, 5. Okay, 5 is half of 150, that's 75. Okay, so add on another 75, and they say, you know what, my area is going to be about 675 centimeters squared. Well, the beauty of this, when we do this and we have students working this way, first of all, think about the number sense that we're helping students to continue to build. I hear teachers all the time in middle grades, all the way into early high school, that say students don't know their math facts, or they're not flexible with numbers. They don't have they don't have a sense of number. This is to help build that sense of number. We're giving them the opportunity to work with numbers instead of just plugging into formulas and putting it into their calculator. They're not getting any benefit from that. They're getting all kinds of benefit by doing this work. So this will take more time, but I would argue you're getting so much more benefit all around. Students are reasoning, improving through these problems. They're building their flexibility. And ultimately, at the end of the day, they're going, wait a second, all of this work, this is my area of my circle. And guess what? If I make this cubic centimeters, then guess what? That's that layer we were looking for, this one layer right there. That volume has just been taken care of. And what we're trying to get them to see, I'm just going to flip back here to our video here, and just I'll kind of zoom through this a little bit just so that you can see what we're trying to get students to do is, once again, to not just apply this formula, but to get a sense of how circumference works. Again, here we try to really make this visual. So if a student in your class wasn't there for your circles unit, or maybe they just need a little bit more time, or they need more experience with it, or they just need to see it again to be reminded, we can again show them this model happening. And this is all built into this visual number talk. We also use a partial product strategy there. So we had, you know what I just realized? I just used a different partial product strategy. Here we broke down the 15 into 10 and 5, and our 45 into 40 and 5. Whatever strategy students feel comfortable with, they can go with, and ultimately see that, you know what? If I know the area of the base, I also know the volume of the base layer, that first layer. And this particular math talk is built off of this idea, because then students will go into the next prompt, and our next prompt is asking students to take what they already know, and instead of going just with the base layer, we're now asking them to explore, hey, what about a cylinder that has the same radius, but now the height is 15 centimeters? And what we want students to sort of make a connection to is the fact that since they already know the base layer, now the only thing I'm going to have to do is I'm just going to have to essentially use like a partial product strategy in order to get myself there. I know the base layer. So could I figure out what 10 layers would be? Can I figure out what the extra 5 layers would be? Can I figure out what the entire volume would be? And the answer is yes. So that is our math talk. Those are 2 prompts. There's 2 more prompts there that you can explore that, again, you can decide how much or how little of that you want to do before you dive into the lesson. But in the actual lesson, what we do is we explore a scenario. It's a context where students are at the movie theaters. And ultimately, I'm just going to jump straight to the image. We're getting them to compare 2 cylinders again. So they have this opportunity to make an estimate. Which container is going to hold more? How do they know? And what we want students to learn in this particular lesson is that, when you vary the width of the cylinder, what we want them to realize through this experience is that, if I double the height and half the radius, or double the radius and half the height, the result is actually not the same. We want students to understand that when you vary the radius or the diameter, that's going to have a greater implication on the volume of the cylinder. And what we want students to be able to kind of rationalize through here and reason through is like, why is that? Like, why does it matter? Like, you would think if I was to doubled the width and I halved the height, and then on this one over here, I doubled the height and I halved the width, like you would think it would be the same. But really what we want students to emerge throughout this exploration is that when you're varying the height, you're only varying one dimension. Whereas when you're varying the base, the radius, when you vary the radius is increasing this way, but it's also increasing this way. It's actually happening, it's a 2 degrees, right? So you're increasing your width and you're increasing your height when you're varying the radius or the diameter of a circle. So that's the big idea for day number 2. We have supports in our guide for you. We've got, sense-making prompts. We give them the actual dimensions. And then, of course, a reveal and some practice for them to explore. But what I really love is when we start diving into day 3 and in day 4, where we give students the opportunity to start wondering about how about a cylinder and how about a cone. And in particular, what we ask them is how much more popcorn. Most students realize they're like, okay, that cylinder is going to hold more popcorn than the cone. But the question then becomes, is it double? A lot of students would say like, yeah, you could probably fit 2 cones in there. Then other students look at it and they say, well, it's like you lose a lot here, but you don't lose any up here. I don't know if it's like half. Maybe it's like you get a little, the cone isn't half. Maybe it's like a little more than half. And you get students to estimate, and then you give them solids, or you allow them to actually craft or create solids on their own. You'll notice here we give them a template where we have a cylinder and a cone where they'll have the exact height and the same height and radius for the cone and the cylinder, so that they can make a comparison. They can fill it, they can do all kinds of things, or maybe you have geometric solids that you can let them explore in your classroom. We let them do that, and ultimately we're asking them, like, what do you notice when you compare their volumes? How much more volume does the cylinder have than the cone? And the goal is for them to kind of land on this epiphany that, the cone with the same radius and the same height has 1/3 the volume of the cylinder, which means that the cylinder has 3 times the volume. And you start to see this, this ratio relationship, this 3-to-1 volume relationship between a cylinder and a cone. And as students go through, and then as we consolidate, and the part in the guide tab that I think is really important is getting down here. You can go through student approaches, but the part that I really think is important is getting students to actually get this sense. So, in our reveal video, we show it takes 3 times as long to fill the cylinder than the cone, or 1/3 the time to fill the cone than the cylinder. And also the amount of kernels. There's 3 times as many kernels as in the cylinder than is in the cone. So we really want to drive home that point. But then also we want to get students thinking about, like, how could you calculate the volume of any cone? So if we know it takes 3 of them to fill a cylinder, basically what we're trying to get students to land on is, wait a second, if I know that I can find the volume of a cylinder by taking the area of the base times the height, if I want to find a cone with the same base and the same height, all I have to do is take that volume and take 1/3 of it. So really, I'm taking the volume of a cylinder and I'm dividing it by 3, or I'm taking 1/3 of that amount, and that is the volume of my cone. So we land on our volume of a cone formula, which could look a couple different ways. So again, the only thing changing from a cylinder to a cone is that now it's 1/3 of the size. And that is that. So there's some reflection prompts for students to practice and all kinds of fun before we roll into day number 4. In day number 4, where we start exploring the relationship between a cone and a hemisphere, so like a half sphere bowl, and we get them to estimate. And ultimately, through this investigation, students will learn that a hemisphere with the same radius and the height equivalent to the radius, all right, so it's almost like this has double the height, is going to be an equivalent volume. So they'll see that actually all this entire cone will fit into this hemisphere, which then leads students to then conclude that the volume of a sphere can be found by doubling the volume of a cone. Holy smokes. Again, given that the cone has the same radius and height as the sphere. So lots and lots of awesomeness in this particular unit. Students get to see this stuff happening. So not only are they going to explore, but they're also going to, see it happen before their eyes, so that they have this, this connection, this moment is made for them, so that they can actually see the different relationships, the volume relationships between a cylinder, a cone, and a sphere. And I think, teaching this unit for me is so much more enjoyable now, because it's all built on conceptual understanding for students instead of just sort of built on formulas. I never understood where the formula for volume of a sphere came from, but ultimately in this particular consolidation, that's exactly what students will, sort of get, is basically seeing, we'll start with the volume of a cylinder as pi r squared times the height, which again, we can do this all conceptually by breaking down that cylinder or breaking down that circle. And now we know, wait a second, a cone is a third of the volume of a cylinder. And in today's lesson, we just realized that, wait a second, all of the popcorn in this cone can fit into this hemisphere. That tells me something. Okay, wait a second. That means that their volumes are equivalent, which means 2 of these cones would give me the same volume as this sphere, assuming that the height of the cone and the height of the sphere are equivalent, and the radius of the cone is equivalent to the radius of the sphere. So we give students some time to sort of land on that idea. We go through and we, again, articulate, wait a second, so this height has to be double the radius. And wait a second, if I just double the volume of double the volume of a cone, I have the volume of a sphere. Oh, that's pretty easy. So that's it. I could literally stop there if I wanted to. But we should let students sort of see that, wait a second, there are ways that we can simplify this. We can replace the height with 2r, and then we can simplify further and see, well, wait a second, that means that's going to be 2 pi r cubed, and we're going to take a third of that. But wait a second, if I have 2/3 of that plus another 2/3 of that, then I really have 4/3 pi r cubed. And there's our, we'll call it the official volume of a sphere formula, which has been emerged through this consolidation and through this problem-based unit. Students are then able to go and reflect by actually doing some calculating and some purposeful practice, and head into day 5, where we summarize all these ideas. And actually at day 6, an assessment is coming, but it isn't released as of the time of this recording, but it might be there by the time you see it. So for me, this particular unit is so, I think, important for students and for us as educators to have access to, so that we can make a bigger impact on students. We can get students to better understand what's happening, that there's not just these random formulas that magically work. Math is not magic. There's always a reason for it. We want students to have a confidence that, wait a second, I understand the reasoning, and from that reasoning, I could then take that information and I can apply it to unfamiliar situations. And now, I'm not the only one who, believes volume of a cone and volume of a sphere is maybe not super, interesting or intuitive. I think there's a lot of us out there who didn't understand where the formula for volume of a sphere came from. Like, where did it emerge from? Some people, if you go in calculus, then sure, yeah, you could apply those, those ideas, and you could algebraically explain it. But when it comes to it, it really just emerges from this idea of volume of a prism, and when we know the volume of a cylinder, that evolves to the volume of a cone, which evolves to the volume of a sphere. And, why I know so many people must be sort of looking for this stuff is, if you look up volume of a sphere on Google, you'll see one of the videos that I released, back in 2014, which is visualizing. It's essentially based on this idea of discovering the formula for volume of a sphere given 2 cones. As we saw, when you look at how many people have viewed this video, all right, over 500,000 people have viewed this video in, the 6 years that this video has been out there on YouTube. So I know that there's a need for it, and that's what's inspired us to create this brand new Pop Goes the Volume unit for you to explore. As you saw, we have 5 days, soon to be 6 days, to explore through this unit. Most of the problem-based lessons are open for you. There are some Academy member only guides in there that you could leverage, but you literally could run this entire unit in a problem-based fashion without having a Make Math Moments account. However, we would encourage you to become a member because of all of the learning that you can do on the back end. So definitely check that out. We'd love to have you as part of the Academy, not only so you can access all of our problem-based units, which continue to increase in quantity each and every week, but also all of our different courses and workshops that are available and the ongoing learning and question and answer sessions that we have. I think it's well worth your time, well worth your effort to head on over to the Academy and become a member. But if not, leverage those problem-based units, help your students to conceptualize mathematics. And my friends, if you've made it to this part of the video, that means you're super committed. Do us a huge favor. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, and maybe even leave us a comment. How did this, this video impact you? Has it influenced your thinking about how you might go ahead to teach volume of a cylinder, cone, and sphere in the future? Or is this all stuff that you've already been doing for a while? Let us know in the comments, and until next time, we will see you every Monday here on YouTube to give you a little bit of Make Math Moments ideas to implement in your classroom. Take care for now, and we'll see you soon.